Dead Space 3 is the last in the trilogy of games featuring Isaac Clarke as he returns to end the story of the Markers once and for all. Atmosphere. In a pretty steep decline from the previous game, Dead Space 3 doesn't give the player much time to enjoy any atmospheric crafts whatsoever thanks to the abundance of combat, but even when you are left alone with it, there's not much there to enjoy. I thought that the musty 200-year-old corridors of the ice planet base lacked the disgusting growths and various other biological features that made the previous game so gnarly. Despite presenting some interesting environments littered with dead bodies and messages scrawled on the walls from long in the past, it doesn't seem to be able to muster the same response its predecessors did. It's almost like its heart isn't in it. There's barely any tension or anything creepy at all during the entire game, maybe because of the amount of combat and action set pieces which seem to take center stage at every possible chance. It ends up feeling like an action game, not a horror game. No Harry Masons. Scares. There aren't really any. It doesn't even try and startle the player. The creepy set pieces from the previous games are all absent too. The enemy design are pretty good, but it feels like a step down from the previous game. Half of the more interesting enemies are gone, and the more harrowing ones are only seen once or twice. New enemies like the emaciated people were pretty freaky, but I found them more annoying than frightening, with the sheer number of them you're forced to deal with. It was interesting seeing ancient necromorphs with what looked like tendrils coming out of their thermal jackets, but overall, the sometimes overwhelming number of enemies greatly decreased my appreciation of them since most of them were just an annoyance. There isn't really any jump scares and the action set pieces provide a thrill, but fear is just not something I experienced while playing the game. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The same orchestral soundtrack returns in the previous game, and there's some really nice string swells and frantic plucking sections like something from The Shining. The sound effects all carry over from the previous games, the same pained groans, metallic creaks and screams are all brought back here, and it's all good stuff like it was in the other games. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. The gore also seems to have been toned down a bit. The biological growth seen in the previous games is only present for a small amount of time, and maybe because most of the game is set in a 200-year-old outpost, environmental blood has all but dried. Dismembering is still a thing, and stomping on corpses to get more item drops is still enjoyable with blood spurting out everywhere followed by Isaac's brutal grunting. Whilst not as prominent as it has been, the gore is still pretty good. That's two Harry Masons. Story. Continuing the events of Dead Space 2, Isaac Clarke is once again dragged back into action, this time by the remnants of EarthGov led by his now ex-girlfriend Ellie, as they try and stop Danik and the Church of Unitology from wiping out the human race in their twisted version of evolution, which takes them through space to an ice planet and the scene of an investigation to the Markers 200 years ago. I found the main story less interesting than the dynamics of the team, between Isaac and Ellie and a new boyfriend Norton, with everyone making snide remarks about each other. Some parts of it were just totally ridiculous and left me stunned that people would act so irrationally when the fate of humanity was at risk, and made some characters almost completely unlikable, even ones I got the feeling I was meant to like. As an antagonist, Danik felt like the least interesting character and a cookie-cutter bad guy from the recipe book of insane dudes. Overall, the story kept the events going, but was pushed behind the gameplay. The final score, 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. It's sad to see the franchise end on such a weak note, but as an action game, it's hard to deny it's pretty fun in that regard. The combat is really enjoyable, and things like crafting your own weapons and playing with stasis and telekinesis against hordes of enemies is entertaining, but it doesn't hold a candle to the first or even second installments. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games. If you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that I was frankly annoyed by the characters. I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer. I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.